Hi everyone, and welcome to the ViaMonstra Academy office hours. This is where you can ask questions about MDT, ConfigMgr, Intune, and imaging, pretty much anything related to Windows or Microsoft infrastructure in general. My name is Johan, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And that being said, we are ready for the questions. All right. Feel free to put the question in. For those of you attending the Zoom meeting, you can just put them in the Q&A function here in Zoom. For those of you that are watching our live stream on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, at least 3 of them now offers chat capabilities, so I can actually see them here on my screen as well. And that's pretty much everything but Twitter at the moment. But either way, for those of you that have been attending for a while, this is nothing new. And I can see a few friendly greetings from the YouTube channel right now. Thank you so much. Hi and welcome back. John had a question already coming into the Q&A here. So I will go ahead and switch over to my demo environment real quick. So the question is basically regarding DFS share storing MDT applications, which works fine for standard installers. But however, when I want to run scripts, etc. from the same share, the install fails. Is there any trick to get scripts running, copy like a folder, etc. from a share that is not within the deployment share? I usually keep my applications inside of the deployment share. Never really seen the need to move it outside of there because that content is always copied down locally when you do deployments or accessed from the local variables when you do deployments. I can't see why it shouldn't work though, depending on what you're executing. As long as using PowerShell script to drive those applications, it will support having working directories as a UNC path, whereas the good old batch files typically did not. So maybe switching over to PowerShell script, if that's not already what's in use, could be a good start. Other than that, if the application just refuses to run over a network share, a common trick, and like ConfigMgr does by default, is to download the content locally first and then execute it locally from a temporary directory or something like that. We also talked commonly in this office hours about actually wimming your applications. So basically create a Vim file of all the application content and have it downloaded locally, and then just mount it and run the installer and installer script from that mounted folder. Very, very effective for download since it's just a single file and it's quite good compression on it as well. But that's the only thing that comes to mind on that part. So either switching to PowerShell scripting, having that as your working directory, or downloading the content first and then execute locally. Hoping that helped a little bit. Otherwise, I mean, adding additional logging to see if something shows up and it seems out of the ordinary, that could be something as well. Let's see. Question coming in on YouTube. What is the difference between a sequence in MDT versus ConfigMgr? Well, funny enough, it's actually the ConfigMgr team that writes the sequence engine that MDT is using. It's just a standalone version of that sequence engine. So when you use MDT sequences, everything that happens behind the scenes is just scripts. When you use ConfigMgr, it's pretty much only executables. I can give an example. If I would take a, if I can find my cursor, here we go. If I take a ConfigMgr sequence that I have exported into an XML file, like this one here. And if I open that with something clever, the formatting we can discuss. Good old IE is still useful, but you can see that, for example, when the sequence applies the OS, so it applies the operating system image, so that action is run there. It's actually an executable component that runs in the background that does that. An MDT sequence, however, if I take one of those, they are always stored in clear text. So this is the graphical representation of a Windows 11 sequence. This sequence has an ID of 01. If I go to that folder and open up that same sequence, actually go to the right folder, it will be great. Here we go. So this is the light touch version of it. And I can open up this one and go to that same step. This is for the WinPE, patches, install operating system, they call it. But here you have, basically, it's running a script instead. This is what we've been utilizing in the PowerShell version of MDT that we've been developing. We just changed underneath, behind the scenes, what script the sequence was actually calling into a PowerShell script instead, because I got tired of all the VB scripts and the limitations that were in that platform by default. But this is basically the differences on how they execute things, and the very fact that the MDT one is a standalone sequence that has to be initiated by something. In the MDT case, it's a script. It's the light touch VBS script. But in ConfigMgr, they even have their own boot shell in WinPE that they use to eventually launch a sequence environment, and from that, they will launch a sequence. But the concept is the same, and if you know how to work with one of them, you can work with the other. I usually tell customers who want to go from having a deployment solution based on MDT light touch and they want to go over to ConfigMgr and do the same thing, that they already done like 90% of the work, because there is so much that is overlapping and the same, basically. All right, let's see. Jeremy is asking on LinkedIn, what's the going strategy for removing the native Windows 10 apps? It looks different for 21H2 than 2004. The core concept have not changed in Windows 10 or Windows 11. You still use PowerShell commands to get rid of the stuff that you don't want. But of course, the applications themselves have changed. Basically, every release of Windows 10, for example, have different set of applications that comes natively with it. So there are a few things to it. One is to block like the consumer experience type applications. That's something you do with policies, into your Intune-based one or group policies. In terms of the ones that comes inside the image, you need a Nikolai in your life for sure. He has been maintaining, not that one, so Lenovo post. On MS Endpoint Manager, if you search for, I'm guessing, remove should be a good search term. Yeah, so he has been maintaining remove built-in scripts for different versions of Windows over the years. So maybe reviewing those would be a good start. So what I like about the script that he offers is that it gives you like a allow list type option. You can tell it either what you want to keep and then get rid of the old stuff, or the opposite around. So quite useful. But for those of you in the Zoom meeting, I'll be happy to post that link in the chat, and these links are something we also publish on the website after the show, in fact. So let me just get that link over. Here we go. So on our Academy site, under the Office Hours course, once you are in this course and it's just the free sign up, you will see all the recordings from earlier ones, but also all the links that has been shared and posted in these events or these office hours. All right, let's see what else. There was a follow-up question regarding the MDT versus ConfigMgr. Which one is better? Well, it's like comparing apples and oranges a little bit, I'm afraid, because if your goal is only to make sure you can deploy Windows to a machine, it's going to be a waste of money to implement ConfigMgr for just that, because MDT will do that equally well. But that's not why you buy ConfigMgr. You buy ConfigMgr to be able to manage the machines over time through the entire life cycle of the device. So ConfigMgr is obviously a complete systems management platform. App deployment, software updates, hardware inventory, reporting, real-time actions on the clients, and OSD. And to me, it makes sense if you buy a platform, a systems management platform, to do all that other stuff. I usually recommend customers to also use it for imaging. But if only imaging is your goal, MDT is a very good choice. I even have customers to this day that I work with. They fell in love with how easy it was to do imaging in MDT, so they still use that to deploy their images. They just have the sequence install the ConfigMgr agent in the end, and then they continue to manage the machines through ConfigMgr. I have worked with organizations, they have their client team and their server team. The client team, they do their imaging in ConfigMgr. The server team does it in MDT, and then add the agent again to have them managed. So it's more like that, not so much which is the better. It's more like what you want to do with the machine when it's done. If you want to do management, and most organizations want these days, ConfigMgr is a really good option. If you prefer to go cloud, well, Intune doesn't have imaging at all. So you can have MDT deploy the machines through a little bit of integration with Autopilot. You can have them automatically enrolled into Intune, and then you manage them in Intune from there. Nihaus actually was just did last week or earlier this week. He posted an alternate solution. Yeah, here. Basically using provisioning packages as a different way to also automatically join devices into Azure AD. And of course, if you join them to Azure AD, you can have devices automatically enrolled that way, assuming you have an Azure AD Premium 1 or higher. So this was actually a really interesting read. So if you haven't seen this one, I'll put that in the chat for you as well. Let's see. Mark is asking on LinkedIn, have you ever seen adding the Hyper-V role in Windows 10 during imaging causing issues with NLA due to the virtual NIC being created? No, I have not seen that. If there was an option to tell it not to set that network card as the management card, because I know you can do that when you add the role manually, so maybe skip that. But I mean, I install Hyper-V a lot during deployment, and I have never seen its network card interrupting the deployment in any way. So I don't really have much more there. It's nothing I've seen. Alan is asking on YouTube, getting an error code when enabling BitLocker in a ConfigMgr sequence. It looks like the group policy is not set to allow the recovery key to write to AD. How do you handle BitLocker in OSD sequences? Well, depends on environment, but this was a ConfigMgr sequence from the question, and ConfigMgr rarely processes group policies as part of when it's running. That kicks in a little bit later. So if you're not using MBAM or BitLocker management, as it's called these days in ConfigMgr, you can still use the classical registry keys to enforce certain types of encryptions. I think I have a older sequence I used. Let's see. This was the child sequence I used to just inject in various sequences, but this one, in addition to checking that the TPM was ready, these were things I was setting to set specific encryption strength, on this case the operating system drive, but also for fixed disk removable, etc. And then in ConfigMgr sequence these days, there are 3 different options to set enable BitLocker. You can use the MDT integration, you can use the manage PDA command, or you can use the native action in ConfigMgr, where you can also define where to create the recovery key. For those of you using BitLocker management, you'll be happy to know that I believe it was in the latest technical preview, they announced that they are now supporting having recovery keys being escrowed as part of the sequence itself when you run the equivalent of the MBAM script that you may have used in the past to escrow your keys. So I hope I answered that question. Let's see what else. Right. So Isaac has a question here in the Zoom meeting regarding VDI jump boxes for endpoint administration. Takes basically a long time to connect the admin console when doing so. It's not something I have tried, and I haven't heard anything related to it either. Good lady to reach out to would be Miss Donna Ryan. Bring up her Twitter account for you. He is pretty much an authority, at least on the Microsoft VDI platforms. In addition to developing the awesome Windwitcher tool. But she recently joined Microsoft and that particular team, and is pretty good in responding to questions on Twitter, always has, being great supporter of the community. So maybe reach out to her and see if she has any ideas, because I haven't seen this one, I'm afraid. Put the link in the chat for you guys. Right. Other questions we have. Nothing right now, it seems. While we're waiting for more questions to come in, I'm happy to announce that all courses for Q2, with exceptions of like 2, have been published, and they will all start in the beginning of April, so April 11, so second week, so mid-April then. Very happy about that. And Office Hours, of course, will continue to run on Wednesdays, different time slots to allow for different people in different time zones to join without having to spend the night just to watch them. All right. John is asking, have you seen a good guide to migrate ConfigMgr roles to new hosts? I cannot say I have. I've seen a ton of guides on the main setup itself and also migrating like databases or doing backup and recovery. I know Anoop has a few guides. That could be a good start. Niall usually is an overachiever on guides as well. Let me see if I can find those links real quick. Guess that will be a good starting point. So either if you guys go to Anoop's site, here are a ton of guides on this one. I'll put that in. And of course the guide master himself, Niall Brady. I've been showcasing his stuff on this show for many, many times, and trying to figure out where his guide library here. Step-by-step guides for a lot of things. And as you can see, he has written lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of guides throughout the years. So usually you're able to find something that can help you. So I'm putting that in the chat as well. Endpoint guides by Niall Brady. Other than that, the process is usually pretty straightforward. You usually scale out with additional site servers and add the roles to them in the same way as you added your roles to your when you set up the main server in the beginning. The roles that are usually moved out first are the user-facing roles, meaning software update point, management point, distribution points, because they simply have scalability limits, each of them. And once you start to have thousands or even tens of thousands of clients that you manage, you absolutely must scale out the site server to be within the supported range, but also for it to actually work. Yeah. Almost answered. There was a follow-up comment regarding the installing additional roles. Basically on running on Windows Server 2000, or basically running a server core. Don't. ConfigMgr wants the LTSC desktop version of Windows for most of what it does. So while server core is fantastic for like a file server or a Hyper-V host or something like that, not for config manager. Use the regular desktop versions of Windows for that one. And these days, of course, it's only the LTSC versions of Windows Server that supports the desktop edition. So that means Windows Server 2016, Windows Server 2019, Windows Server 2022. Don't use anything else for config manager environments, the site servers and all those roles. All right. Friendly recommendation. There's a question on YouTube here. Can you show me how to create a local admin in a task sequence? Most organizations, they simply have a script they run or something similar to create that account. You can also configure an attend file to create local user accounts. It's fully that's an option as well, but it usually gives you a little bit better flexibility to have a script that does it dynamically. The question that came up on Twitter earlier today actually was regarding, okay, what about passwords? How can I secure them just a little bit? Not super secure, but maybe better than clear text. In ConfigMgr, for example, this one here. Here's a sequence I'm using for modern driver management. And modern driver management is using the admin service, and that one needs a service account. So I'm actually setting that username and password as a variable. But you can see that the password here is actually obfuscated. It's not visible in clear text. Now, if you really want to get hold of it, it's not super secure in that sense, but at least it's not just something I can copy and paste in clear text. I've seen a lot of folks using regular PowerShell script and basically convert them into exe files. So, for example, Sapien has some tools to do that. If you're using their PowerShell Studio, that one can convert scripts to exe file. Again, not impossible to crack open, but it's more than average Joe maybe do with a copy and paste. There have also been some freeware tools over the years. I remember Adam posted something of PS2XE back in the days. That's an older tool. It's been around for a while, but maybe something like that. I've seen organizations using the good old AutoIT to also convert scripts into executables. But I'll put these links in the chat for you, and maybe they can be useful. Because I mean, the goal here is not to being super secure, it's just obfuscating it a little bit. So this one obviously has a license to it, in my opinion, worth every penny. I think it was like $22, $20 a month or something like that for their subscription option. But good stuff, especially if you're into writing GUIs. This tool is more or less the must. Not really sure if you have tried writing a GUI in PowerShell just using like a PowerShell ICE or VS Code editor. It's challenging. Visual Studio have some graphical capabilities, of course, but the Sapiens tool are really good. All right, let's see. Another question coming in on YouTube. You know your way around ConfigMgr and MDT and want to learn about Intune. What's the easiest way to get hold on it? MDT is free and ConfigMgr has evaluation, but what about Intune? There are two, I think, really good ways to get a trial of Intune. One is to sign up for a Microsoft 365 developer. Those are free. You get it for a month and you can extend it after or later. Or you can go to, let's see here. Not the link I was looking for. I have a trial link here. Here we go. So this one is for 90 days and 250 users. Excellent way of learning about Intune, because EMS contains not just the Intune license, but also Azure AD Premium and all the other things that you need to do more fun things in that environment. So when we do our courses, when we do our Intune courses on the Academy, this is what we are using for every quarter. We sign up a new trial and we have the students go through that particular setup, and we work with everything as we go by the different weeks in the Academy program. So in my opinion, great solution if you want to try it out. This is a forward link, so that should work no matter what. See if I just copy that one out and see if it works. Open up Incognito. Oh yeah, that works. All right. I'll put that link in the chat for you. And again, these links are published to our website when we're done. Matt is asking, in the sequence, is there a way to limit drivers? I'm working for a company that have a bunch of different models and therefore different drivers. In my opinion, and this has been the case for the last 2 decades, I like what's called the total control method of drivers, meaning that you have one driver package per model. What I don't like seeing is where you basically either, if you're doing MDT deployments, and you basically just import every driver you have into the out-of-box drivers, or if you're using ConfigMgr and you just go with the native option of importing drivers here, don't. Skip this part. It's no longer useful, it's no longer needed. A better option is to create packages per model and have the sequence assign them that way. The most common solution, talked about that many times here on the office hours, is the modern driver automation tool. That was a new release this morning, 7.04 of this one. But this is a download amazing tool that will help you to simply select the models that you have, hit download and import, and it imports them either to MDT or into ConfigMgr and create the packages. And then in the case of ConfigMgr, they also provide you with a little, not so little, it's like 15,000 lines of PowerShell script, so quite the opposite of little. But the automation tool is that the apply script is smaller. But it's just a script that you run that connects to the admin service and figures out, okay, this model, which package does it need? So basically, the only thing you need to do is to fire up the tool every now and then, and you pick the models you want eventually. This was the really long script I was talking about, compiled into an exe file. But you pick the models that you want. You hit download and import, and they will show up nicely as regular packages in ConfigMgr when you do this. And the script will make sure that the right packet is assigned to the right model. That way you don't have to deal with those 40, 50 actions in a sequence that had different conditions on them, and you have to maintain that across 4 different sequences. It's just nice to have a single script that takes care of it. The only thing you need to worry about is to download the packages every now and then. So amazing tool. Must have talked about this at least 10 times here on the Academy. But good stuff. Good stuff for sure. Andrew, one of the instructors here in the Academy, I saw him just sneaked into the chat here and actually also pasted the link to the Micro 365 trial version as well, or that program. So thank you for that, Andrew. Appreciate it. All right. Matt is asking a follow-up question. What do you mean by when you say not import, how do you create a driver package? Well, behind the scenes here, what this tool does, it just creates a regular ConfigMgr package. So say that I have, for the sake of argument here, say that I have a folder where I have a Vim file containing the packages for this model. The only thing I need to do is create a package, optiplex, whatever model it was, latitude, I think. And specify the source files to that. So I will browse to that location. BIOS, this was drivers, and I will select that folder. So now I have a package with no program for that model. And this is using a legacy package for drivers. This is much more reliable for distribution, deployments. It's faster HTTPS. It's fantastic for peer-to-peer. And you can assign these packages very, very dynamically in the sequence. This is way better than bloating the database and importing the drivers, in my opinion. We stopped using this about 3 years ago, the old method of importing drivers, and switched over to a more dynamic method. It's simply more reliable and better. I have an environment with a few more drivers up here. Here are some Dell models, here are some HP models, Lenovo models. I did not create these packages myself. The driver automation tool did that for me. And then I just have that single script and the sequence to apply them. And a really important piece to the driver automation tool is that in the ConfigMgr settings, it does have the option of compressing drivers into WIM files. And I have seen this speeding up deployments from like 20 minutes down to 2 minutes in terms of the driver piece. Because if you guys are doing deployment over Cloud Management Gateway, if you're deploying over AWS in general, or if you're trying to do peer-to-peer, having a 2 gig file or folder with thousands of small files in it, it's just very, very ineffective to download over the network. Whereas downloading a single WIM file is just amazingly fast and very, very effective from a networking point of view. So good stuff there. Can you share this script? Let's see. Yes, absolutely. I posted a link earlier, and if you go to that particular blog post or release post on our blog, they take you through the entire setup, how to set up the admin web service, how to add in the apply driver package script, where to download it, etc., etc. So step-by-step instructions on how to get this going. Another, of course, totally shameless plug is to join our imaging courses on the Academy. We'll be happy to have you for 6 weeks and do OSD, but the tool is available here. All right. Alan is asking, okay, say that you go for a trial, how do you extend it? Well, in the EMS case, unfortunately, you'll have to pay for it if you want to have it more than 90 days. In the Microsoft 365 developer case, they have options to continue with the free extensions of it as long as you keep applying for it. In terms of ConfigMgr, say that you're using a ConfigMgr trial, a Windows trial, they will expire after a while. And there is no extension unless you have a real product key that you can apply. The process is very easy. You just run the setup, pick maintenance mode, provide the key, and in 30 seconds later, it's activated and you no longer have a trial. If you cannot afford the licenses, or if your manager simply won't give them to you, which they should, your only option is to spin more lab environments. On my blog, we have the various hydration kits that we've been working on for years and years and years. They allow you to very, very effectively spin up new lab environments. So you can, when the old one expires, you can spin up a new one. A cool thing that not too many people know about ConfigMgr is that as long as you keep the site code unique, you can actually use the good old migration tools. Folks might remember them from going from CM07 back to 2012 back in the days, but they can also be removed to transfer content from one lab over to another. So you can use it to promote from dev to production or from pre-prod to production, stuff like that. So you simply connect your new setup to the old one and you can transfer over a lot of the stuff that you have in the old environment. Other options, if to export stuff that you have out there and use those and import to a new lab. But unfortunately, there is no like a renew of the trials that you download from the Microsoft Evaluation Center. At least not the ConfigMgr ones. All right, so let's see. Matt is asking on Facebook how to solve deadlock issues in SQL. But I'm assuming this is for a ConfigMgr environment because ConfigMgr can be used the SQL Server quite aggressively, put it that way. There are a few products out there that is using SQL more than ConfigMgr does. What it usually comes down to is to scale it properly uh, for the size that you have in your environment for the load that is currently there. I usually prefer to keep the SQL locally on the site server because in course of performance, it's quite an effective operations compared to having it on a remote node somewhere. Sure, you don't get all the high availability stuff, but you do get some pretty good performance because every operation is now basically in the same virtual machine rather than having to go over the network to grab another VM. Microsoft have been publishing over the years some generic guidance on performance. Let's see if I can find that white paper. This is an older version, but this is basically their scale guidance white paper, where they will tell you things like, see if I can find something good. Yeah. Depending on how many clients you have, this is kind of what you should have in terms of memory and SQL. But they also tell you the IOPS of the disk environment, the disk subsystem that you use to run this database on. And this is usually what I found have a bottleneck. Because even if they tell you, oh yeah, our data center is or our storage cluster supports 20,000 IOPS, they throttle that and they give 1,500 to you for a volume. So you can use tools like disk speed to verify that what you have is actually okay. When we do ConfigMgr health checks, we check for that. Basically, the first thing we do. I have an older post that I wrote for 2012. Basically, right, how you can test things. This was an older tool that was the SQL IO. The new version is disk speed, but basically providing good, fast volumes for your database, multiple volumes, so they can be sized individually and hopefully get some better scalability. Other things to know is that depending on SQL version, SQL may or may not have created multiple files for the TempDB database. And that can cause a significant decrease in performance if you don't have enough of those, because ConfigMgr sometimes does between 30 and 50% of its operations against the TempDB. So I'll put this link in the chat for you because it's still valid even though it's a little bit older. But you also have from Steve Thompson, one of the MVPs. He used to be a SQL MVP before he became a ConfigMgr MVP, but he knows his stuff. CM TempDB. Here we go. Again, few years old, but still super valuable. And this is basically what you have to do in your environments. And I have seen organizations doing this change only, just optimizing the TempDB that remove that performance problem completely. SQL is better these days. Starting with 2016, they kind of by default create a bunch of different files, but you still have to do some optimizations for ConfigMgr. So good information in this one here. Somewhere on his blog, Steve also have a script that you can run that does an audit on your current environment and kind of tells you how good or how bad it is in terms of SQL setup. Information. Right. I do not see any more questions at the moment. We still have a whopping 9 minutes at our disposal. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, or here in the Zoom meeting for those of you attending that one. Other questions? Cover them all. Alan is asking, am I going to MMS? Oh, yes, I am. I'm looking forward to that so much. It's been years since I went to that conference. For those of you who haven't heard about it, this conference happens in Minneapolis, inside of Mall of America, by the Radisson Hotel. This is by far the best conference if you want to learn about Intune ConfigMgr deployment. It's simply the best. And I know that they still have seats available. So if you have nothing on your schedule in early May, highly, highly recommend it. So I'll put that link in the chat. Me and Andrew is going to be there. We have got 4 sessions approved, so we'll be busy that week for sure. But yeah, it's a good one. I was trying to find a tweet from our friends at Patch My PC here, because they were doing a campaign. I wonder if it's still up and running. Guess otherwise Justin will be yelling at me. On here, for those of you following, they did have a raffle for some of these tickets with a good good reduction or good discount. If they're all gone, they usually go fast, but this was only like a day ago, yesterday, March 8th, yeah. So maybe that. Fantastic question. Alan said somebody won at least one of these already. Yeah, I bet they probably go pretty quick. So Matt is asking, do you recommend ConfigMgr SQL and WSS on the same books for production environments? The database is yes. The actual roles typically no, unless you're a small environment. I mean, if you have 1,500 people that you manage 1,500 clients, there is absolutely no problem at all to have a single VM doing all of that work. Possibly break out the distribution point, but that will handle that just fine. But if you have 10,000 clients that you need to support, you actually need to offload some of those roles, otherwise that's going to be a busy server. So as long as you move out the management point, the software update point, and the distribution point, or actually you need a few distribution points for that size, you're good. The site server itself and SQL, they will happily run together on that virtual machine. As long as you have enough memory, it's good. The challenge with ConfigMgr and memory usage is that when you talk to the team that manages the virtual environment, IPv, VMware, whatever they're using, they often look at average usage and they say, well, we're not going to give you 4080 gigs of RAM because you're only using 24 on average. Yeah, but guess what? Around Patch Tuesday, I need more. I need like 20 more. So make sure you have enough headroom in your environment for the peaks. not just for the days when there are no traffic and you're usually in much better shape. And hardware these days, it's not that expensive. But it can be quite interesting when you are in these discussions of asking for more resources when you cannot show that this is always, it's just every now and then you need those resources. But don't give up that fight. Make sure that the site server has enough memory and juice to run what it's supposed to do. And you will have a more happy ConfigMgr server. Follow-up comment there for 7,000 clients. Yeah, I will definitely start to scale out even with 7,000 clients because, for example, distribution points, maximum supported is 4,000. So I will definitely have at least 2 of those. I will break out the management point, probably software update point, possibly. Depends a little bit on the load and how fast your VM is in that environment. All right. Any other questions? Question coming in here on Zoom regarding, okay, so this is using an MDT sequence to deploy a precision 5820. The sequence fail. Is it possible to have documentation on how the sequence formats the hard drive and installs the OS on NVMe disk or using an NVMe driver? MDT itself doesn't have a distinction on using NVMe versus a SATA SSD, for example. In our PowerShell deployment kit, we're adding in that functionality, so we actually give you an option to say prioritize NVMe disks over others, because an NVMe disk actually has that particular bus type. But that comes down to using a custom script instead of the default script that MDT provides. If you really want to see what's going on behind the scenes, you can go to an MDT sequence or MDT deployment share. And the script that does the disk partitioning is this script here, the disk utility. This is the script that the sequence is calling when it does the partitioning of the drives. So if you really, really want to see what's actually going on behind the scenes, you can read this several hundred lines, the VB script. So that. The sequence itself store the variables that you have configured inside of the sequence. So if I take one of these XML files that we looked at earlier, and search for UEFI, for example, here is the step in the sequence that does double BIOS. This is UEFI down here. This is where you can see all the settings that have been applied that this script consumes and uses. But there's nothing wrong. If there's something that you cannot do in the sequence with the native steps, you can supply your own partitioning script. One of our customers, they're using our extension. They wrote their own utility script just to deal with disk partitioning their way instead of using the default MDT stuff. It's very open. John posted a link here in the chat. Share that with you. This is an older blog post by Anton regarding some additional logic on how to dynamically. So this is also a custom script that allows you to work with multiple disks. That could be helpful as well. Thank you for that, John. Good stuff. Good stuff. And time flies when you're having fun. We're up on the hour mark. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope to see you next week. And I forgot what time it was, but yeah, we're doing morning hours next week. So 9 to 10 Central Time, allowing people in Europe to join as well in the afternoon. And other than that, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all the good questions. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.